Hello, and welcome to the DCL Learning Series. Today's webinar is titled Deciphering the Tower of Babel, How the Language Metadata Table Helps Manage Media Assets. My name is Marianne Kalahana. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So please feel free to write your questions in the question box as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, we will get in touch with you personally after the webinar. Next slide, please. If you could hit next again. Sure. Before we begin, I'd like to provide a brief overview on Data Conversion Laboratory, or DCL as we are also known. We like to say our mission is to structure the world's content. Content can unlock new opportunities for innovation and monetization if it has a foundation of rich structure and metadata. For content to be easily discovered and used via modern platforms, it should be converted into a multi-dimensional XML format from which machines can extract pertinent information. Next slide. At DCL, we offer a number of service categories, and I'm not going to read through each of these, but I will say DCL is best known for its onshore project management, excellent customer service, as well as working with complex content and data challenges. Next slide. We work across many industries, and here are just a few of our representative customers in the areas of defense, government, pharma, financial and legal, technical documentation, libraries, and publishing. Next slide. So I'm delighted to introduce today's presenter, Yona Levinson. She is the Manager of Metadata Strategy at Warner Media. Yona never anticipated that when she entered an ad in college to typeset for the student newspaper, that it would launch her career in metadata, standards, and markup. She's been instrumental in implementing change wherever she works. At Warner Media, she's focusing on metadata and taxonomy terminology strategy and governance, leading efforts to extend terminology consistency while adhering to industry standards. Previously, Yona was at Pearson Education, where she developed and implemented global metadata standards, working side by side with data architects, markup and workflow specialists, and content creators to come up with flexible solutions to meet today's educational needs. Yona was active with multiple standards development efforts, including BISG committees, as well as contributing to the IDPF EduPub markup standard. She was a key contributor to Pearson's rights metadata standard and system implementation efforts. Prior to Pearson, Yona was a project manager here at Data Conversion Laboratories. She's received her master's in library and information science from Rutgers University and is the co-founder and co-director of the Digital Asset Management Certificate Program at Rutgers. She teaches metadata for DAM as well as content integration for DAM. And Yona is the chair of the Language Metadata Standards Committee, or LMT. Yona, thanks so much for joining us today, and I'll let you take it from here.
Hi, Marianne, and thank you for that warm introduction, and welcome to this webinar on the Language Metadata Table. I'm really pleased to be here and back with some of my DCL family. So as Marianne said, I'm the Manager of Metadata Strategy at Warner Media. I'm currently part of an analytics group, so data is where it's at, and there's a lot to do. If you're not familiar with Warner Media, these are just some of the shows and some of the talent that we have. You may be familiar, may have heard of Game of Thrones, or, you know, Anderson Cooper and all kinds of really cool stuff, John Oliver stuff. So Warner Media it consists of HBO. HBO Max is actually launching next Tuesday, and Turner, Warner Brothers, and CNN. So there's a lot of metadata out there. But the language metadata table, I started that back, well, I'll give some more information there, but it's been around for a couple of years. These are just some of the committee members and contributors that we work with. You may recognize some of the other broadcast and entertainment companies. And but there's also interest from other areas as well, which is why we thought this would be a good webinar for the DCL community. So metadata, there's lots of languages everywhere, and I don't know about all of your particular worlds, but in our world, it's, you know, we're not just dealing with English, we deal with Spanish, you know, French, Italian. If you saw My Brilliant Friend, there's both Italian, Napolitan in there, and there's all kinds of languages everywhere, and you want to make sure that you're using the right terminology to hit your particular audience. And when we started going down this path at my office, I was sitting in meetings, and there were a bunch of people in there, and they're like, okay, well, what language are we gonna, you know, what's the language code for Spanish, for Latin American Spanish? And we went down this path, and I found out that there were different codes in different systems, all standing for Latin American Spanish. So within my own organization, there was no single unified standard. We started looking around and found that there were some different standards, but they didn't quite fit our needs. And that's what started the language metadata table. Last year, I was fortunate enough, the LMT was nominated as the Taxonomy Boot Camp Best Practice Award. This was for Taxonomy Boot Camp London. And on my flight over, you know, these are a little bit hard to read, I saw there were all these codes on the screen because I finally had time to sit down, watch a movie. And it's a little bit small in here, but you can see there's like IT, JP, LS, PO. Now, mind you, I had already been working with language codes. I've been working with metadata terminology for years. I'm like, what the heck is PO? So I'm like, is it Polish? Is it Portuguese? So when I dug down a little bit further, I did find out that PO did in fact stand for Portuguese because there was no Polish in the offering. And I just thought this is so indicative of here's a great use case for where there needs to be standardization of language codes. And also from my perspective, having worked in IT groups for really all of my career, I could see plenty of real estate in here where they could spell out the information so that I wasn't looking at something and guessing, what does PO stand for? And then again, finding out that it's Portuguese. And here's this great shot of, you know, when you're sitting on a plane, if you remember back to those days a few months ago. So, so the scope for the LMT is we've really just focused on the languages. It's the notation of the scripts and the writing included, because you need to make sure that you have the right codes for the written language as well as the audio language. We also are including the endonyms, which is the language name in the country's language. And also there can be exonyms available as well. The language is spoken in other countries as well. So this way we'd have French, Français, and I cannot pronounce the last one, but all that information. How do you do it?
Französisch.
Thank you. So, and I'm not sure what country that's from either, but maybe Germany. In any event, it is German. Okay, so there's all these different ways to call the languages, and I needed a centralized table where this information could be available for the different audiences that were available or that needed it within my organization. So what's our mission statement? Because we wanted, again, to have this unified source of reference, particularly we're focused on the media and entertainment industries. But what we've also found is that it can be applicable for other areas, other industries as well. So I don't like to reinvent the wheel. I like if there's something that's already there, let's take advantage of existing standards. And when we poked around, we found out that there was already a standardized, a way to get better language codes across, and that was IETF BCP 47, also known as RFC 5646. I'll go into that a little bit more, including spelling out of the acronym and what it stands for, because those of you who may work with others with ISO standards like 639, it just didn't have enough of, it wasn't granular enough for our purposes, or in some cases broad enough. So we want to make sure that there are consistent practices and usage throughout best practices. And also, as with any of you who have ever participated on any kind of a standard, that to make sure that there's approval, that we vet all the definitions and make sure that there is agreement and consensus and sign off with the thought leaders who focus on the information, the data from the business and professional associations, institutions, throughout the exchange of knowledge and collaboration. So as I said, this began back in 2017. It was work for HBO, which is now Warner Media. And we're sitting around a room, like I said, and found out that there are all these different flavors of Latin American Spanish. It was LAS, SPA-LA, LATAM Span, in some cases just SP with the but we always use Latin American Spanish. But at times you really need to be more detailed with regards to your use of language. Should it be Spanish is spoken in Spain or in Mexico? We all know here, particularly if you're in the US, there could be French, but if you're speaking French in Louisiana, it could be Creole. If you're speaking French in Canada, it could be Quebecois, or it could be French is spoken in France or Paris. And so anyway, we needed to differentiate all these different languages. So in 2017, we started with 128 languages that were in use at HBO. And we presented that in 2018. So MESA Alliance is a group called the Media and Entertainment Support Alliance. It's a support organization, has several hundred members across the broadcast and media industries. And they hold regular meetings and conferences, and they said, hey, what you got? And I said, we've been working on this cool language thing. They're like, let's present it. I'm like, okay. And then they said, how about we make this an industry standard? And that's what happened. So we formed a working group with those people from that earlier slide that I showed from all those different companies. And we published our first formal version of it, LMT 1.0. At this point, we're now in it's now May 2020, hard to believe. Back earlier at the beginning of the year, we published LMT 3.0 with over 200 languages. And we have actually a few more that have been requested, and we're getting ready to publish LMT 3.1 with some corrections and with some additional language requests. The way that we also go around, we do this is by making sure that there is a use case to show that there is a true need. As a result of having worked with the languages for so many years, like I remember reading an article not too long ago in the New York Times about there's some island off South Carolina where they speak some other kind of a dialect. I don't think it's in common use. It is not our job to track every language that may be in existence, but really, is there a use case where you need to define what languages are being used? And that somebody may end up searching for, et cetera, within your business and within your business and organization. So here are a number of different reasons why having a common language metadata table with a table of codes is because we need it, particularly in media entertainment, as well as publishing and other content-centric organizations. We need it in broadcast media for audio and time text for content. We need visual or written languages. I noticed that today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So if you think about people who have different kinds of have accessibility requirements, they may need to know what language, what's the audio language. They may need to know what's the written language if they have audio, an audio disability, you know, a hearing issue. They want to make sure that they can read it in the language that they expect. There's a lot of talk out there now with regards to localization, meaning that somebody may want to say, you know, what's all the stuff that you have on Mexico, or what's all the stuff that you have, what's all your content for this particular company, et cetera. And one of our early participants was from Hasbro Toys, and they were particularly interested because when they make their games, they have to make sure that they have the right language included in the instructions as well as the packaging. Broadcast and media, again, if you're gonna, you know, those of us of a certain age, we have been known to buy DVDs and you know, Blu-ray and stuff like that, and we wanted to know what might be the alternate languages besides English that would be on there. So from localization, you want to know what's out there, but also from a rights and licensing perspective, what languages is one allowed to use or apply, or what is one buying? The distribution territory, so I mentioned Latin American Spanish, and that was again one reason why we needed to go. We couldn't use the ISO 639 code for languages because they were by country, or we combined those with 3166. You could do it by country, but there wasn't for a geographic area of Latin America or North America or Europe or Asia. So we needed something that would encompass that as well as being able to go more granularly. And as I mentioned here, the accessibility, so the subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing is the SUDH. And like I said, there's also for Braille, you know, for readers, screen readers and stuff like that, knowing what language can be very helpful. So advantages of adopting LMT, by having standardized codes that show what the distinctions are between the written and the spoken languages is really helpful. It provides it provides flexibility, because this way you can compare, you know, do I have it in Latin American Spanish? Do I also have it in Argentinian Spanish or Chilean Spanish, or Portuguese as spoken in Portugal versus Portuguese as spoken in Brazil, et cetera, et cetera. And with all the different work that I have done in my career, and Marianne mentioned that I had been participated in the BISG committees, and I've also given this presentation to that group as well. There's a lot of data that needs to remain within one's own organization as well as being exported out, possibly in some kind of data feed, so it can get pulled into, you know, if you're in the book world, it get pulled into Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, et cetera, et cetera. And you want to make sure that everybody's presenting the information in a consistent way so that they don't have to interpret or have some kind of unique feed or mapping table that knows this is, when I see X from SPA from this organization, then I know it's Latin American Spanish, but if I see SPA from another one, I know that it's Spanish is spoken in Chile. So by having the standard set of codes and everybody agrees, here's the display value, here's the audio code, here's the written code, it just takes away a lot of, it takes all the guesswork away. One of the big things that I make sure that, or in order to get a language added to the LMT, we want to make sure that there's a use case meaning not, as I said before, there was this island, I think, in South Carolina. Maybe somebody wrote one story on it. Is it enough to be an LMT? I'm in the broadcast and media industry. We're distributing content all over the world, and we need to make sure that those who are receiving our content know what language it's in. So this is just an example. But for use case, what we've been kind of going with is that we need, you know, like 8 or more uses of a language in order for it to be considered for inclusion. Then we work it through, and I'll go into more of this, some more details, through the working committee to make sure that everybody has approval, because we keep finding that company A may use this particular flavor of a code based on legacy, and somebody else may use something different. And can we come to a consensus on this? And we're also working to get other standards organizations to also agree that this is a good thing. The LMT is a good thing. But we have all these different audiences we need to please. The licensing, distribution of content, accessibility definitely is up there, and then also make sure from a localization perspective that we're providing what's needed. So here are some of the different examples. I've mentioned them. We need the audio, what language it's in. If somebody may want to say, well, it's in English, but perhaps it's with a Scottish accent. You know, English is spoken in Scotland or in Great Britain, or in English is spoken in Spain. There may be, or English is spoken in the US, or generic English. There may be different accents associated with those different, with the audio. And so it may be difficult for somebody to hear, and they may just want a particular, you know, a particular dialect, or they may want to see, are there also closed captions or forced narratives burnt in, or forced narratives, are those also available? And on this, in the shot on the right, you can see there's probably, you know, there's probably audio, but then in here, there's the closed caption so that people could be able to understand. And all the different examples that I really just mentioned now. But it is really important to mention with regards to the written versus the audio that there are a number of languages out there where the written language is different from the audio language. Chinese is an example, and also Serbian has different, it has 2 different alphabets. It's got a Latin alphabet as well as a Cyrillic alphabet. I have some examples of those. And also with the burned in or forced narratives, if somebody has a sign, you know, it's a stop sign, or I always think of the opening or some of the shots in Star Wars where they're establishing, you know, what planet they're on, and that what is that language that the location is written in. All right, I'm going to move on now, and now here's the meat. Here's IETF BCP 47. IETF stands for the Internet Engineering Task Force. BCP is the best current practice, and number 47 is the number of the practice. And this is down here at the 4th bullet. This is how it's constructed. So it is a combination of existing standards. So I've mentioned a couple times ISO, the International Standards Organization 639, which is, they have a bunch of different language tables. There are 2 and 3 character language codes. ISO 3166 has the 2 character language codes. But now when I'm starting to get to Latin America and other, you know, territories, 3166 is purely country code. So by extending out and using another standard, which is not maintained by us, but it's maintained by the UN, now I have a place to have my, I can have my territory defined. So Spanish, as spoken in Latin America, is now ES-419, and I'll have examples of that as well. you can combine, if you take all those different standards out there, you can combine and come up with more than 40,000 different combinations. And that's a lot. So people can say, and I've run into this again in my own company, where like, well, we're adhering to IETF BCP 47. Okay, but what code are you using for Spanish? Are you just using SP, or excuse me, ES, or using SP, which, you know, ES is the preferred term for Espanol. And how are you designating the country? Oh, we just know it's Latin America. So by being able to be more granular, and those of you who have worked in data conversion, you know, sometimes we may have to start very broadly, but in order to narrow things down, that's not always so easy. It's always easy to go from granular up to broad, but going broad back down to granular, not so easy. So let's give the codes that we need, mark up the content accordingly, and then you have enough leeway to play around with it. So one of the other nice things about adhering to IETF BCP 47 is that the codes are under regular review to make sure that the lists are kept current. So as per the example, Greenlandic was updated to Kalaallisut to reflect cultural norms. There's some other, we've had a lot of conversations about Norwegian lately, and it's also supported by the W3C. So what does it look like? Here's what the syntax is. So it's got the language, script, I'm not in the green there, language, script, region, variant, extension, private use. So now I can have Mongolian as written in Cyrillic as used in Mongolia. And again, we have the 40,000 combinations. And here's the real charm, the third bullet of the LMT is that you have these pre-constructed codes supported by the use cases. So you don't have to think about it. Just say, what code do I need? Look it up, there it is. We also defined the language grouping. So if you can see what the options are for Spanish, it's a little bit difficult for Chinese, but you know, there are use cases for them. And then we make sure that we have the group name, the tag, the code, make sure we have values for audio and the visual and descriptions. So here's an example of what a table looks like in here. So in the first column, we have English, so that's pretty straightforward. On the left-hand side, these are all the different sub-elements that we capture in our taxonomy tool. And so we have all these different values in there, and there's a place for everything and everything in its place. In Spanish, as I said, ES-419 for Spanish is spoken in Latin America. And if you needed to have it, you know, our default is in English, but then if it's in a language other than English, then we have the value, you know, what it looks like in, you know, as an endonym. And then also the visual language. Serbian was a challenge because it could be either, if you see, go down to, I don't know, my mouse. Over here, it's got Serbian SR with the Latin script as spoken in, I guess, RS, the Republic of Serbia, but also in Cyrillic. So what's really interesting, it kind of blew our minds, is that for Serbian, it's 50-50. There is no dominant written language there. So we had to make sure that we had a place to hold the language tag, visual language tag 1 and 2. Orally, it's just one language, but written it could be other ways. In Chinese, there's all kinds of interesting things that go down in your written languages, so visual. And we did visual also because of sign language, because it's something you see with your eyes. But in Chinese, you can have either simplified or traditional Chinese for the written, but then you have lots and lots of different audio tags. Could be Mandarin, could be Cantonese. There's Chinese is spoken in Hong Kong and in Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. So this list is actually quite interesting. Armenian, again, there's Eastern and Western So that was somebody else on the committee who runs a translation service. So they clued us in on that one. So there's Armenian as spoken in by people in the Armenian diaspora. And then last but not least, the American Sign Language. And you'll notice that there's no audio language for, because it's a sign language. It only has a visual language. And then again, so here's the ASC for American Sign Language. So here's what's been going on is MESA Alliance, which again, I encourage you to take a look, mesaalliance.org. They have been a sponsor because this was going beyond Warner Media, and we needed that support from an organization that was supported by the industry. And MESA gives us, I'm the chair of the LMT committee, and we've been posting information on the MESA website, you know, with we have the XML, we have a spreadsheet, we have documentation, we have presentations out there. And again, they've given us a home and they've provided resources to help us with that, those kinds of efforts, including the running of the working committee meetings. However, SMPTE, which is the Society for Motion Pictures Television Engineers, is also a very well-known, it's one of the main standard bodies in the broadcast and media space. And they have a very robust setup for standards adoptions, and they also have a lot of tools and other resources and the infrastructure to help support the LMT. So this way, you know, it'd be easier for others to work with the standard and be able to pick up. So we're in the process of moving over from MESA as the physical home of SMPTE, of the LMT, to SMPTE, where it'll be easier for people to find and access it. It'll hit a broader audience. In addition, we have partners that we're working with, IDER, which is the Entertainment ID Registry. Many people may not have heard of IDER, but they are the, it's like the ISBN for broadcast and media content. So you'll find movies and television content, all different kinds of stuff in there. ISDCF is the Inter-Society Digital Cinema Forum. They have maintained for, you know, many years their own language table, which was in desperate need of being updated. And so they're interested in adopting LMT so that they don't have to do the same work all over again. Movie Labs is an organization that also works on distribution standards for broadcast and media content. In many ways, they would be equivalent to like the Onyx standard in the publishing world. So again, you have to have a target. What are the fields that everybody is going to need? What are the codes that are allowed? And will this, you know, who can take it and do what? So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that there is, so the LMT for publishing, I think it's really useful this way you know exactly what your audio content code is going to be. I know that in coming from the educational world that there would often be audio clips within an ebook, and so it would be good to know what language or languages those clips are in, and again for accessibility. As I mentioned earlier, Hasbro and other organizations, including my own, need information about the languages to include on packaging, and it's also useful for manufacturing because you need to know what language is your content, you know, does this contain? And as I said earlier, there's over 200 languages so far, and there's more coming. Moving forward, we probably have our next working group meeting in mid-June. We're working on the 3.1 release. There's some technical details we're working out. MESA Alliance continues to be the sponsor and to lead LMT with me as the co-chair. We'll move to SMPTE for the technical home. There will be URNs for SMPTE URNs. Currently, we have some in the table now that aren't quite what they should be. And we're also working on a common language code register and therefore updated documentation. For resources and links, general inquiries, you can send to these email addresses, lmt@macealliance.org. And then to get to me, the direct contact, LMT chairs. And if you go to the macealliance.org site, there is a working committees link. And then if you scroll down, you'll find the language metadata table, and there's a bunch of different postings in there. One more thing I thought would be helpful for you all is are these validation sources. So these are different places where we go to check to see what code is already being used. And again, lots of folks are already adhering to IETF BCP 47. So we're just jumped on the bandwagon. We just made a table of the codes. We're not reinventing the wheel. So that's what I have to say. Marianne, should I go to the next slide?
I think you can keep it here in case people want to jot down some of these URLs.
Okay.
I will also share the slides in a format on the Data Conversion Laboratory website so that people can click through and find the URLs a little easier than writing them down, just in case. So I'll alert everyone on today's webinar about that. So thank you, Yona. We do have some questions that have been submitted. So if I could toss one of these to you. So is the LMT fully compatible with IETF BCP 47? And is LMT an extension of BCP 47 or an implementation of it?
The LMT is an implementation of IETF BCP 47. So it's fully compliant from that perspective. What we did was, because you can take those various codes, whatever, I think if you take all the ISO codes and the UN codes, you can come up with, there's like 9,000 codes altogether, and you can make 40,000 combinations. And instead we just, made it look a lot simpler by having just, reducing it back down to this and say, here's your value, look up whatever you need and go for it. And if you need something else, you can go ahead and make your own, but maybe consider submitting a suggestion for inclusion to the LMT committee.
All right. Once you establish the LMT, can you talk about how you go about applying it to content? Do you just do day forward? Do you go into your back file? Do you focus on a particular content type? Any suggestions for best practices for someone getting started?
My recommendation is to figure out how it works best with what your workflow is. If you're doing I've had very interesting, interesting in air quotes, experiences where updating existing metadata could have taken, this was a few years ago, could have just taken several weeks to really sweep through the whole database and then apply it and then make sure it got distributed out. So you have to really decide what's best for your own organization. One could maintain a mapping table under the covers that has the, like your current codes and then your new LMT codes. So this way, if you have a lot of legacy data, you could just include a transform on the way out the door. So I recommend that you take my metadata for DAM class at Rutgers for more information on best practices from that way.
Okay. In light of today being Global Accessibility Awareness Day, can you speak a bit more about how this can help? Maybe provide some details on subtitles, captions, some interesting stories that you've experienced?
Sure. So along the lines from, from an accessibility standpoint, There is so one of the stories, this is accessibility, but it's also context. Is there was the movie Roma that came out last year, and Alphonse Cuarón, when he saw the subtitles that were being used in Spain, had the movie yanked out of the theaters because it had been turned into Castilian, and the movie is set in Mexico. So he felt that the Castilian subtitles changed the whole context of the movie because they used, I think, like madre for mother instead of mama, and it was they just felt it just didn't reflect properly. So knowing what language, your audio codes, or excuse me, your closed captions and your subtitles are in can really impact the experience a viewer has. And then also, depending on from an accessibility standpoint, if you're from the US and maybe people don't know that COLOUR is the same as COLOR. So COLOUR is the UK or the British spelling for color, and then COLOR. So from an accessibility standpoint, and again, the colloquialisms can cause problems for those who may have different kinds of disabilities. So knowing exactly what language their content is, whether it's audio or visual, can really make a difference for the experience.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Yona. Thank everyone who registered and attended. This is the end of our program today. In light of so many webinars, we at DCL, the DCL Learning Series, we're experimenting with having a bit shorter webinars so that we can provide you with more information over the coming months. So this webinar, we did try to keep it to 45 minutes for your benefit. This concludes today's broadcast. You can access many other webinars related to content structure, XML standards, and more from the on-demand webinar section of our website at dataconversionlaboratory.com. We hope to see you at future webinars. Have a great day.